Let's talk about literary fiction, specifically the books that I would recommend for certain genre of readers. I wanted to focus on 4 different genres, 3 books within each genre that I think are a good introduction into the literary fiction space. I started this over on my TikTok a few months ago, so I did like intro literary fiction books. Then I specified it to romance, thrillers. I just posted a horror one. This series all came about because I used to talk to people and they didn't really like literary fiction. Maybe not that they didn't like it, but it's really overwhelming and it's kind of difficult to figure out where within you fall because literary fiction covers such a broad range of genres, authors, writing styles, topics. So it can feel really overwhelming trying to figure out where you fall within the space. That's what sparked my idea into doing the videos, and I wanted to go ahead and make a YouTube video for it. One, to include new different types of book recs, make it easier for everyone to see the different books all within one video instead of multiple different ones. And hopefully you're able to find a book either that you haven't heard about before, something that you might be interested in. This is a book stack of everything that I wanted to go ahead and talk about. So I have 4 different genres: romance, thriller, science fiction, fantasy. 3 books within each category, so I'll have 12 books in total. Let's get into the books. Disclaimer, that book stack was kind of just a prop because I don't actually have physical copies of everything, but we're gonna get started with science fiction. The first book that I have is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. The setting is 1994. In this dystopian novel, items slowly start to disappear. The disappearance of these items is then enforced by the memory police. There's just something in the air when the people that live here wake up. They start to feel like something is off. They don't know exactly what. Memory police begins to come and collect things, for example, birds. Anything that's bird related, they go into the homes and take all of it. Nobody's able to bring up the topic of birds ever again, which is only a concern for the select group of people that are immune to this feeling in the air when something goes missing. They have to be undercover to make sure that the memory police doesn't find out about them, because if not, they get taken away, which interestingly enough, you would assume that that means that our main character has this ability and she's one of the select few, but she actually isn't. So as readers, we are starting to forget the memory with her as well, which is quite interesting. I went into this thinking that it would kind of be like 1984 with the thought police. It definitely isn't, but it's still really interesting. Initially when I read it, I didn't really like it, but the longer that I sit with it and the more that I think about it, I do appreciate it. Yoko Ogawa also is one of my all-time favorite authors. Her writing is really subtle and eerie, and I absolutely adore it. This is a good in-between because you still get that sci-fi element of explaining some parts of the world and why people are starting to forget things, not fully, because the rest of the focus is on these characters and the writing is beautiful and luscious, so it feels like it's a really good in-between. Next up, we have Foe by Ian Reid. In this one, the year is 2065. We live in a rural area, follow 2 characters named Junior and Henrietta. They've lived a very mundane, slow-paced life. Overall, they're pretty happy about it. Till one night, there's a man from the government that just drives up to their house, knocks on their door, and tells them that Junior has been selected for this outer space mission. There isn't really much choice in it, but he tells Henrietta, don't worry about it because there's going to be a replacement that comes down to take Junior's place. I read this for a book club, so I feel like if I would have read it on my own time, I would have finished it much quicker. It was so hard to stop reading at the section that we all agreed on because I genuinely really wanted to keep going. It's a really impulsive read. Some people say that they were able to catch on really quick. Either I just don't pick up on things, or I just thought the writing is so good, it's so subtle, and I didn't pick up on what ended up happening. What I appreciate about this book is the overall message of like, what does it mean to truly be human? There is a film adaptation to this. I loved the actors in it. I don't know how I feel about the film, so proceed with caution with the film, but the book I loved. Then we have a book called Loneliness and Company. In this book, we follow a character named Lee. Lee is a type A student, top of her class. She's ready to graduate, thinking that she's going to go to one of the famous Big 5 companies. Actually, she was recruited for a really small one out in New York, so she has to move. When she gets there, they tell her, actually, spoiler alert, you were selected for a top secret mission. Maybe not mission, but it is a top secret job, and basically she needs to collect data for an AI called Vicky. The purpose of Vicky is to try to tackle loneliness. Loneliness is an emotion that the government removed from their emotional index. So is it sci-fi? Yes, because it's set in like a different version of New York. Will it really explain the world building and all of that? No, it doesn't. So it is used more as a framework for what the author wanted to explore. So do keep that in mind, but since Lee was so committed to school, obviously she really just goes all in with this project and will go to great lengths to obtain this data. She puts herself in really questionable positions. The beginning is a bit slower, but things really start to pick up, and the more data that she collects, the more that lead just began to spiral uncontrollably. And the question this one leaves you with is basically, can AI teach us things that we struggle to wrap our minds around? If you want touches of sci-fi, I would go this route. If you want something more heavily sci-fi, then I would go with one of these two. But these are the three that I would recommend for science fiction. Now for the thrillers, I don't actually have any physical copies, so these are just going to be the placeholders. But the first one is for people that enjoy the film or the book Gone Girl, for people that enjoy the TV show You, following a character that is so meticulous and well thought out to the smallest of details, very persistent and very set on an end target. These qualities are very admirable, you know, to an extent. And that is what our character tries to work on in a book called My Husband by Maud Ventura. This is a translated fiction. I read this as an audiobook, finished it within the day because I was just so hooked on this story. This is a woman who deeply loves her husband, but I mean, too much of anything is never good, and so she is walking a really fine line on how badly she loves her husband. Has a whole system in her mind of like, if he does these things, then okay, I will act this way. But if he doesn't do this, then he gets down to this. And there's a whole system that he is completely unaware of. She was such an interesting character to follow. The story is told through her perspective, and I loved it. My only critique is that I wish the book was just a little bit longer. Wanted to see a little more that happened within this relationship, and we're just trying to see, can this marriage survive it? The cherry on top of this book is the epilogue. I was not expecting it at all, and when I got there, I was so shocked by it, and overall, it was just a really fun read. Next up, we have a book called The Center. The Center is thriller, but it's also literary, but it's also a bit of speculative fiction. Our main character has a job translating Bollywood films. She's not really passionate about it, but she doesn't really know what else to do until she runs into this man. She starts to overhear him on the phone, and he's starting to speak in like 3 different languages. She is just so shocked at how he's able to do that. She ends up talking to him, they spark a relationship, and then eventually he ends up telling her, you know what, this is how I'm able to speak all of these languages. I go to a very selective word of mouth kind of facility. She ends up getting the opportunity to go. At this facility, they basically tell anyone that attends, they are able to completely become fluent in any language within 10 days. That's it. I'm so gullible, I easily would have gone, and I would have continued to go again and again and again, which the idea sounds great. Like, who wouldn't want to experience that and to be able to reach fluency? But of course, within the halls of the facility, there is this big looming secret on just how they are able to make all of these people reach fluency within any language. What I loved about this book and why I would recommend it is because the concept I personally think is so unique. The writing was really easy to follow. It kept me very engaged. I do recommend the audiobook for this one as well. And it was gruesome, but in a really good way. And the final book for the thrillers is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This book was so good. The book really irritated me because of the character that we follow, but I could not stop reading it. And now that I think about it, I also did the audiobook, which makes sense why I don't have physical copies for any of these 3. I tend to always listen to my thrillers. So if you are interested in listening to them, I would recommend all 3 of them. But with Yellowface, we follow 2 author friends, Athena and Joan. Athena is a really successful author. They're celebrating something for her, and then that night it's just Athena and Joan back at Athena's house. Something ends up happening to Athena. She does end up passing that night, and while Joan is in her place, she sees that she left a manuscript of a book that she was working on. Joan decides to take this opportunity and say, hey, you know what? I really want to advance my own career as an author. Athena's doing so good. Nobody's really gonna know that it was hers, and now she's passed. So she decides to end up taking the manuscript, claiming that she wrote this book, and publishes it, taking full credibility for writing the book. I think even though I was so irritated throughout the book, I really loved the social commentary that was seeped throughout it, and that's why I continued and continued to listen to it until I finished it. And I think the overall question of who has the right to tell stories is really important. Finished this book really, really quick. It left me itching to read another R.F. Kuang book. It's the only one that I've read by her, so if you have any recommendations, please let me know which one you love. We have our fantasy books. I have another 3 for you. Again, don't have physical copies of any of these, but we'll just put these in place of 3 that I want to talk about today. kind of four technically, because one of them is a prequel to the other. I guess we could just start with that one. It is Biiter and Pet by Kweke Emezi. After I read these books, I was completely hooked with Kweke Emezi's writing. They are one of my all-time favorite authors, and the setting of both of these books is a place called Lucille. Biiter is the prequel, and Biiter is the start of a revolution. So Biiter does go to a school called Eucalyptus, and Biiter, along with her friends, play a role in advocating and fighting for this change within Lucille. That is the Lucille that we know when we start reading the book called Pet. It's a bit tricky to explain, but bear with me. So the two characters from the prequel, Biiter and Arlo, end up marrying, and they have their child called Jam. Biiter is a painter, and one of the figures within the paintings comes to life one day, and the figure says that its name is Pet. Pet is a monster hunter. This strikes Jam as being weird because within Lucille, they removed all the monsters. Removing the monsters was a part of the revolution in the prequel. So Jam is really off-put why there even is a monster hunter when the society should be clean and it's a utopia and it's beautiful and there's no more harm being committed. Jam ends up finding out that this monster is someone really, really close to them. Kweke Emezi was able to simplify such a complex topic and make it more of a discussion, not only individually trying to figure out how to accept that sometimes the people that we think we know we don't really know to our core, and then on the societal level trying to come to terms with what choices we leave people to make when as a society we are in denial. Something that I tend to struggle with fantasies is the complex world building. I'm just not there and I really struggle to visualize it. But what I appreciated with both Biiter and Pet is that the world building is really easy to follow. It's quick. We get straight to the point. Both books are really, really short. And I'm crossing my fingers that Kweke Emezi writes more fantasy because I'm hooked. Next up, we have The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. This is a gothic, atmospheric beauty of a book. Also listened to the audiobook of this one and really, really loved it. Have a couple different characters at play, but the main one is called Indigo. Indigo is an heiress. She is this enigma to her bridegroom. So she ends up meeting this man. They get engaged, ultimately married, but the one rule that she had for him before getting married is you cannot question or bring up my past. At that point, he's in the honeymoon phase. They are in this beautiful little bubble of desire and love and infatuation, and he's like, I don't really care about your past. That's fine. And it is fine until one day Indigo's aunt calls her. Basically, they have to go back to her childhood home, and the bridegroom starts to feel really weird things while he's walking the halls of Indigo's childhood home. Almost feels like to him that the house is trying to tell him things and trying to lure him back into Indigo's past. So the writing is really purple prose. It's extremely atmospheric. We follow two different perspectives. The two perspectives are past and present, and then the bridegroom and one of Indigo's childhood best friends. If you love books that are very atmospheric, extremely detailed, that purple prose writing that I mentioned earlier, this is definitely going to be right up your alley. It is one of my favorites. Lastly, we have The Haunting of Alejandra. We follow a woman who is really struggling mentally. She has depression. She's starting to feel a lot of ambivalence towards motherhood and just feels like a shell of an individual. Her husband comes home and is like, why haven't you cooked? When are you going to feed the kids? As if he can't do it himself. She feels as if she's living for others and not living for herself. She feels a lot of shame for even thinking that because she should be grateful that she has a husband and a house and a family, and she doesn't know how both feelings can coexist at the same time. Culturally, I think really struggles, and that culture focuses on being a mother and being within the home. That is what you devote your life to. So thinking of anyone other than yourself is like, how dare you even think that way? And so what's really interesting about this book is as she's internally really struggling with all of this, it takes on a La Llorona twist, which is this folktale spirit of a woman who drowned her children, and now she roams the streets in tears night after night, mourning the loss of her children. And La Llorona is a figure within this book to talk about breaking generational trauma and talk about advocating for yourself and normalizing this feeling that a lot of mothers go through. This is only book by V. Castro that I've read, but I would love to read some more. Now we can get into the romance selection. So 3 different books here. The first one that I want to share is called Yerba Buena. This one has really heavy trigger warnings, so definitely keep that in mind. It is not very hopeful. Well, kind of. It's a bit happy, but it's leaning more on the sad side. There's a lot going on. This is a sapphic romance. We follow two women in their 20s who have dealt with a lot of immense trauma. This follows a past and present timeline, so we do jump back and forth quite a bit. In the present, it's when they finally meet, how their lives slowly become interwoven, and then things come up from the past that have to bring them back. Throughout the book, we follow them trying to process what happened, trying to build a new path forward, either together or alone. We don't really know. Romance is definitely a subplot in this book, so it does take a back seat. If you want something more romance heavy, then I would recommend Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry. I will read any and every Emily Henry. Every time there's a new book release, I always go and I make it the effort to read it that same day. I have 2 different videos posted about it. I've also ranked all the Emily Henrys. I also have a video on that, but I love these. I think she does such a good job of balancing heavier things but still making it feel light and airy and joyful. She has a combination down of adding rom-com moments in a book that feels really complete. Characters feel fully fleshed out. The situations that these characters go through feel rooted in reality. Even what the characters are struggling with, it all just feels really realistic that I can get behind it. Not to yuck anyone's yum. If you want to read a billionaire romance, by all means, read it and love it. But if you don't enjoy that and you're looking for something a little bit different, then I highly, highly recommend any of Emily Henry's books. Since literary fiction is so character heavy, I personally always want to feel some type of connection to the character, either good or bad. That keeps me engaged and keeps me wanting to keep reading, and that is definitely what I feel whenever I read an Emily Henry book. And at the same time, you don't have to give up those elements that you love within a rom-com. So you really get the best of both worlds. Now, I personally would recommend either Book Lovers, beach read, or funny story. Everyone has their own preference when it comes to Emily Henry though. Ultimately, I really do enjoy all of them. Now for the last romance, I don't have a physical copy, but it is The Stationery Shop. I truly adore this book. I need to get a physical copy because the cover is just so beautiful. This is actually a historical fiction literary romance, which normally I'm not a fan of, but I am such a fan of this. I also just realized it has another past and present timeline. Present day, our character is migrating to the US to go to school, and in the past, it is set in 1950s Iran. Political climate at the time is very extreme. Our main character tries to find some type of solace within a little stationery shop, and that's where she meets the love interest. So then they both start to meet at the stationery shop, secretly find ways to communicate with one another. It is like there's a little bubble of happiness surrounded by all of this chaos and madness around them. The book was really, really bittersweet, to be quite honest with you. I cried reading this, but it still is so beautiful. The characters, again, fully fleshed out. The full story is very developed. So even when she goes to school, I was still really interested in what was going on. As the book goes on, of course, their paths end up intertwining in different ways as the different stages of life go on. The writing is really lyrical and beautiful, and I just absolutely adore this book, and I don't see that many people talking about it. The ending had me in tears, good or bad, I can't tell you, but I definitely recommend this one. So those were all of the books that I wanted to go ahead and talk about today. If you want to see me cover different genres or an extension to the list that I've already mentioned, let me know and I can do a part 2 or just continue on this series in general now on my YouTube channel. But hopefully you were able to find a new book that you might be interested in or a new author. Those were all the books that I wanted to talk about today, so thank you for watching. Oh my gosh, not again. Okay, we're done.